My name is Roland Evans. I've been a psychologist and psychotherapist for over 40 years. During that time, I've worked with a wide range of people, many whom have suffered from terrible experiences and events in their lives, and have had to live with the consequences of those events for many years. In this presentation, I'll give an overview of the nature of trauma and traumatic memories. The word trauma is used in many different ways, often with little understanding of what it means from a psychological perspective. Traumatic experiences are ordinary. We've all had things happen to us that felt unbearable at the time: abuse, accidents, losses, and even violence. Many of us have had life-threatening illnesses, difficult childhoods, and unpredictable, overwhelming events. However, while we may have all experienced potential trauma, only some of us become actually traumatized and go on to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. With this presentation, I hope to answer the question of why this happens, and also what we all need to heal from these, our most difficult experiences. So what is trauma? Trauma are those experiences that overwhelm our ability to cope psychologically, neurologically, and even physically. It may be a single event, such as a car accident, or it can be ongoing over a long period, such as chronic illness. So trauma leaves a psychological scar. This can take the form of dysfunctional moods like depression and anxiety, behaviors such as addictions, and negative ideas about ourselves, low self-esteem. These scars also take the form of emotional reactions which are triggered by similar events. So for instance, after a minor accident, my 8-year-old son was afraid and clung onto the seat whenever we got into the car. Trauma causes stuck traumatic memories. And these are what get triggered in similar situations in the form of flashbacks and reactions. Traumatic events are overwhelming, but not all of those events leave a psychological scar. It's natural and normal to heal. And as I discuss later, if we get the help we need, we can heal fully from even the most horrific experiences. But when trauma remains unhealed, it intrudes into our lives and causes us to react emotionally and physically in ways that are unhelpful and even destructive, particularly to our close relationships. That happens because the traumatic memory is stuck. It's as if we are still in the original experience and react as though it is still happening. In the next slide, I'll discuss the differences between traumatic and ordinary memories. So ordinary memories shift and change over time. Traumatic memories don't. You might say that a traumatic memory is the past in the present. The experience has become frozen in time. It doesn't move, it doesn't shift, it doesn't change. And while ordinary memories have little or no emotional charge, traumatic memories come with a strong emotion: fear, sadness, anger, guilt, disgust, even a feeling of pollution. The memories become stuck in the body as a particular knot of tension, usually in the stomach, the chest, the shoulders, the throat, or the head. These are the most likely places that people feel their traumatic memories physically. So ordinary memories aren't exact. That means that we construct them from our best guesses and various bits of information. Think about what you had for dinner, say 3 nights ago, or what you were doing on Tuesday evening a month ago. You might be able to work back and remember those memories somewhat, but they'll be vague. You'll have to reconstruct the events. So unlike those kind of memories, traumatic memories are always the same. Think of them as like a recurring dream. The unconscious is stuck and it keeps repeating like a broken record. Flashbacks happen when a person is triggered by something in the present that evokes the traumatic experience in the past. So a war veteran will hear a loud noise and crouch down and look for a person with a gun. A woman who's been raped will be hypervigilant and avoid similar situations, maybe walking down the street. A person who's had a car accident and had a bad experience may not be able to go into a hospital. So what are examples of traumatic experiences? The list includes sexual abuse and rape, violence and physical abuse, chronic insecurity, threats and fear, major accidents, illnesses and disability, emotional and physical deprivation, abandonment, loss, separation, and betrayal. This is a long list of bad things that happen to people. And this only covers the most common, but certainly not all the different kinds of traumatic experiences. As you can see, they include a mix of single incident events and ongoing longer trauma. And it's not always possible to distinguish one from the other, as they tend to cluster together. Someone who's been abused as a child is much more likely to experience abuse as an adult. And so as I went through this list, it's extremely likely that you've experienced one or more of those things yourself. Certainly that's true for me. The worst experiences are those that cross the line between ordinary and extraordinary, between normal and abnormal. These experiences are invasive. They're physically and personally damaging. They're a threat to our well-being, a threat to our values and our sense of trust in other people. They make the world seem unsafe and unpredictable and force us to be overly cautious and more anxious than we need to be. They make us feel bad about ourselves, unworthy, guilty, ashamed. Sexual and physical abuse of all kinds constitutes the worst forms of trauma because they include things like a betrayal. These are far more common than we'd like to think or believe. Because they are shaming, the victim often doesn't talk about them, doesn't tell anyone. Deprivations, particularly emotional deprivation, is harder to recognize. Many of us have had emotionally deprived childhoods, often with losses and betrayals that have damaged our sense of self. So when we experience trauma and it remains unhealed, it creates post-traumatic stress disorder. What does this look like? Well, I've talked a little bit about this before, but these are some of the main symptoms and signs of PTSD: anxiety, vigilance, and jumpiness. That means a feeling of being unsafe, of always being on guard. Overreactions and flashbacks to unthreatening situations. Depressions, guilt, shame, insomnia, nightmare, and poor concentration. These are very common. Irritability, angry outbursts, and aggression. Self-destructive behaviors such as addictions. Now, these are some of the signs and symptoms of PTSD. PTSD causes extreme personal suffering and interferes with a person's ability to cope and get on with life in a productive manner. As I said, trauma damages our sense of safety and trust. It makes us doubt ourselves and be wary of others. It makes us believe there is something wrong with us. And when you look at the signs of PTSD, they only make sense when we think of them as adaptations and compensations to the damage, the internal damage done by the trauma. It's like a person who limps because their foot is damaged. You can see the past damage to that foot in the way they behave in the present. You might even say that PTSD symptoms are signals from a deeper part of us that tells us something is broken, that we need to change. However, because of the pain and intensity of PTSD, it's often very hard for a person to face and resolve their traumatic memory. Trauma and PTSD are at the root of most psychological problems. So there are three elements of trauma. As I have discussed before, not all traumatic events lead to PTSD. Most human beings are extremely resilient. And given even the smallest amount of appropriate help, the healing response tends to kick in. Think about all the cuts and bruises you've had over the years. They heal, and then you forget them completely. So with trauma, there are three elements that create a situation in which a person is most likely to get stuck and suffer from PTSD. The first factor is the vulnerability of the person at the time of the traumatic event or events. This vulnerability is both psychological and neurological. Babies and children are the most vulnerable because their brains are still forming. So a child is most easily overwhelmed by a bad experience. That's why abuse or deprivation during childhood has such long-lasting and terrible consequences. Because our brain was still forming, we do not have clear memories of our earliest experiences. Many things can have happened that have left a scar, but we may have forgotten them completely. They're like hidden memories. The next factor is the severity and duration of the traumatic experiences. If sexual abuse, for instance, goes on for months or years, the damage is incredible. It's so severe. It goes deep within the person. If a person is violently attacked and physically disabled, PTSD is more likely, as for example with soldiers who lose a limb in battle. Finally, and most important for trauma, is the quality of the healing environment. I will talk about this in detail with the next slide. What is a healing environment? The best way to think of a healing environment is to remember back to when we were children. If we got hurt or upset, what did we do? What did we need? If our families were psychologically healthy, we were able to run to our mother or to another safe person. They would give us a hug, hold us, and ask us what is wrong. They waited patiently without interrupting while we told the story. They didn't try to fix us, and they didn't discount our pain or experience, but they were there for us until we were ready to go back and play again. So a healing environment is a safe situation and a supportive relationship in which the other person is present and attentive, not talking too much, not persuading, not rationalizing, and certainly not distracted. We need to be heard and our experience accepted as true and important. We need to feel our feelings, be upset as long as we need to be upset. And we need a situation in which our brain can settle down, our nervous system can relax, because it's only then that processing the experience can happen. While we're overactivated, our neurological and sympathetic nervous system are not ready to accept and understand the experience. Only as we settle and focus inward can we reevaluate and integrate experiences. And we need to have at least one night's sleep filled with dreams for full healing to occur. Dreaming is when we process in our psyche. Deep sleep is when we heal physically. So sleep and time are the essentials for full healing. It takes time and processing for a traumatic memory to change into a normal memory, to slip back into the past where it belongs. So what is the best form of therapy for trauma? In the light of everyone's need for a healing environment, trauma therapy has to have similar qualities: a safe and calm situation, a supportive relationship, non-judgmental acceptance of all experiences, time and space to express difficult feelings, and therapeutic procedures that help the person move forward in their experience, both psychologically and neurologically. Trauma therapy can be difficult for the therapist as well as for the client. It's important that the therapist brings all their personal and professional skills to the session and is able to care for themselves during the session and outside of work. Many therapists experience what's called secondary trauma from hearing the horrific stories of their clients. So the therapist has to develop courage and resilience to be able to stay fully attentive and fully present. Traumatized clients may be withdrawn or angry and aggressive, so it sometimes feels hard to develop a good relationship. So creating and maintaining a good healing environment is the foremost skill of every good therapist. In the next video, I will give an overview of EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. This is a procedure and process that helps clients get through their traumatic memories quickly and effectively. However, like every therapeutic technique, its effectiveness depends as much on the healing environment as the techniques and skills of the therapist. Thank you.